The chains around Ravenna's wrists were cold, but it was the silence of the crowd that froze her blood. She stood at the center of the Iron Vale auction floor, a vast stone hall carved into the bones of the northern mountain, lit by 100 torches that threw amber shadows across the faces of 200 wolves who had gathered to watch her humiliation. Her feet were bare on the ice-carved floor. Her dress, the same rough-spun gray she had worn every day of her life as a servant of the Ashven pack, was torn at the hem from when they had dragged her through the courtyard. Her silver blonde hair had come free from its braid and hung in tangles around her face. She kept her chin up. She had learned long ago that the only thing she had left to protect was the way she stood. On the raised platform before her, Elder Draven was speaking to the assembled bidders in the loud, practiced tone of a man who had done this before. He had done it before. Ravenna knew that. She had watched 2 other Omegas sold from this same hall in the past year, their eyes glassy with shock, their mouths pressed thin to keep from crying. She had told herself then that she would never stand where they stood. She had been wrong. The female before you is an Omega of unmated status, 22 years of age, strong back, obedient history. She has been in service to Ashven for the entirety of her life. No pack bonds, no claims, no complications. She is being offered by direct order of Alpha Carvin of Ashven, who has generously donated her to the Iron Vale auction in lieu of the pack's overdue territorial tax. Ravenna's jaw tightened. Donated. As though she were a piece of furniture. As though her 18 years of labor, cooking, cleaning, tending wounds, raising pups that weren't hers, had been reduced to a line in a ledger that balanced against a debt she had never incurred. She searched the crowd for a familiar face and found none. The wolves of Ashven had not come. Of course they hadn't. They had sent her here with 2 guards and a signed document and gone back to their fires. Bidding opens at 200 silver marks. The hall stirred. Ravenna heard the murmur of consideration, the casual cruelty of men pricing a woman the way they priced livestock. She fixed her gaze on the far wall, on a crack in the stone that ran from floor to ceiling like an old scar, and she breathed. She had a secret. She had always had a secret. And as long as no one discovered it, she could survive whatever came next. The bidding climbed slowly at first. 300. 4. A heavy-set wolf in the front row raised a paddle and called 500 with the ease of a man who spent that much on wine. Ravenna did not look at him. She did not look at any of them. She was thinking about the night, 6 months ago, when she had first understood what she carried inside her. It had happened in the Ashven forest, far out past the perimeter where the pack forbade Omegas to run. She had gone anyway, because she had always been better at disobedience than she was given credit for. The shift had come over her without warning. Not the small, controlled things she was allowed in the servant quarters under supervision, but something vast and wild and radiant, a surge of power that had lit the trees around her silver white, that had called the birds from their branches and the deer from the underbrush, that had made the earth hum beneath her paws like a tuning fork struck against stone. She was not a standard Omega. She didn't know what she was. But she knew that if anyone found out, she would not be sold. She would be studied, taken apart, used in ways that made the auction floor look merciful by comparison. 1,000 marks! The bidding stopped. The hall went quiet. Ravenna looked up. She had not meant to look, but the voice was different from the others, not loud, not performative, not the voice of a man who needed to prove something by calling a number. It was quiet and absolute in the way that mountains were quiet. It did not need volume. It had weight. He was standing at the back of the hall, apart from the crowd, which parted around him the way water parts around a stone. He was tall, taller than any wolf she had seen, taller even than Elder Draven's guards, and he wore no ceremonial colors, no pack insignia, no armor. Dark clothing, dark hair pushed back from a face that was all carved lines and still precision. His eyes, even across the distance of the torchlit hall, were a pale, storm-washed gray that caught the firelight and threw it back. She did not know him. She had never seen him. Every wolf in the hall had turned to look at him, and every wolf in the hall had taken a single, unconscious step back. Elder Draven cleared his throat. 1,000 marks from, he faltered, from the representative of Lucan Drav, Alpha of the Valdenmoor Sovereign Pack. A pause. No representative. I speak for myself. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Ravenna had ever heard. The Valdenmoor Sovereign Pack. She knew that name. Every wolf on the continent knew that name. The oldest pack, the most powerful, the one that sat at the center of the Northern Territories like a closed fist. Its alpha had not been seen publicly in 3 years. There were rumors that he had gone feral after his fated mate died, that he had sealed his borders and let no one in, that he had become something more wolf than man. Looking at him now, Ravenna thought that perhaps some of those rumors were closer to true than their tellers knew. There was something about the way he stood that was not entirely domestic, not tame, not contained. "Sold," Elder Draven said, with rather more speed than dignity. The gavel came down. Ravenna did not flinch. She had promised herself she would not flinch. But her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, and the secret she carried, the wild, bright thing coiled in the center of her chest, stirred in its sleep like something waking. They processed her through the holding rooms quickly after that, with an efficiency that made it clear they were more nervous about the buyer waiting outside than they had ever been about the sale itself. A woman in a gray apron removed the chains from her wrists, replaced them with a leather cord that was, technically, no different, a leash without a loop, and handed her a bundle of folded traveling clothes. Not the gray dress, something darker. "Get changed. Alpha Drav's party is waiting in the courtyard. They leave before the 4th bell." Ravenna changed. She did not ask questions, because questions were for people who had options, and she was cataloging options the way she cataloged everything, quietly, behind her eyes, where no one could see. She had no weapons, she had no money, she had no pack and no bond, and no one in any direction who would notice if she disappeared. She had her secret. And she had her feet, and she had spent 18 years learning the floor plan of servitude, which meant she also knew every door in every building she had ever entered, and she was already counting exits as they walked her through the Ironvale Hall and out into the night. The courtyard was large and cold, lit by carried lanterns. 4 wolves stood near a line of horses, none of them wearing expressions that encouraged conversation. The alpha himself stood slightly apart, his back half turned, looking at something in the middle distance that apparently required more attention than the slave market he had just purchased from. Ravenna stopped 3 feet behind him and waited. He turned. Up close, he was even harder to read than he had been across a torchlit hall. His face was not cruel. She had seen cruelty her whole life, in the easy contempt of Ashvin's ranked wolves, in the way Alpha Carvin looked through her when he passed in the hall, and this was not that. It was something else, something closed, like shutters on a window that had once looked out on something he no longer wanted to see. His pale eyes found her face and held there. Something happened. She felt it before she understood it. A pull, like the tide answering the moon, a recognition in her chest that had nothing to do with memory or choice. The coiled thing inside her woke fully, and for one terrible, dizzy moment, she felt the silver-white light trying to rise through her skin, and she pressed it down with everything she had, pressed it into her bones, held it there, caged it. His nostrils flared. The expression on his face shifted. Something cracked, very slightly, in the stone of it. "What are you?" he said. It was not the question she had expected. She had expected, "You will address me as Alpha." She had expected, "You will follow my orders without question." She had expected the usual inventory of commands that men gave women they had purchased, not, "What are you?" "An Omega," she said carefully, "as listed." His eyes did not move from her face. "That is not what I scented." The night felt very still. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She said nothing. Her hands were still at her sides, very deliberately still, and she kept her face neutral and her eyes level, and she did not let the silver-white light move 1 inch toward the surface. He watched her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the horses. "Come." She came, because she had no other option. But her mind was already working, already measuring the distance between herself and the tree line, already noting the direction of the wind, already calculating the exact number of seconds between the moment she broke and ran and the moment his wolves caught her. Too few seconds. Not yet. But the night was young, and she was very good at waiting. They rode through the night and into the gray wash of pre-dawn, stopping only once to water the horses at a stream that cut through the pine forest. Ravenna sat her horse. She could ride. She had taught herself on the pack's older mares when no one was watching, and kept her eyes on the path ahead and thought. Luke and Drav rode at the front of the group and did not look back at her. This was, she had decided, either very good or very bad. A man who kept watching his purchase was nervous about what it might do. A man who kept his back turned was either supremely confident or supremely indifferent. With this man, she genuinely could not tell which. What she could tell was that he knew something was different about her. He had scented it. That was the problem with alphas. Their senses were sharper than any other wolf's, honed by generations of pack dominance. And whatever she was carrying had apparently announced itself to his nose in a way she hadn't managed to conceal. She needed to know how much he knew, and she needed to keep him from knowing more until she understood what he intended to do with her. "You're thinking very loudly for someone who wants to appear calm." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" He turned his head slightly, not enough to look at her, just enough to let her know he was aware of exactly where she was. "The forced neutrality, the measured breathing, the way you've been cataloging my guards' positions for the last 2 hours. He paused. "It's skillful, but I've been doing this a long time." Ravenna was quiet for a moment. "What do you intend to do with me?" The question was direct, which she suspected he hadn't expected. She saw the line of his shoulders shift slightly. "That depends on what you are. And if I told you I'm exactly what the auction document said, an Omega servant from the Ashfen pack, I would tell you that's the second lie you've told me tonight, and that I have considerable patience for most things, but not for that." The pre-dawn forest moved around them, dark and cold, the horses breathing white clouds into the air. Ravenna looked at the back of his head and made a decision that was half calculation and half something older, a gut instinct that had kept her alive in a pack that had never wanted her, that had learned to read danger and safety in the set of a person's spine. He was dangerous. She had no doubt about that. But he was not lying to her. And in her experience, that was rarer than safety. "I don't know what I am," she said honestly. "I only know it's been inside me for 6 months, and I've been hiding it because I'm not ready to find out what happens when someone with power over me finds out." The silence stretched. Then he said, still without looking at her, "No one in my company will harm you." "You'll forgive me if I find that difficult to trust." "I expect nothing less." They rode on. The forest began to lighten around them, shadows going from black to gray to the pale green of morning filtering through pine, and somewhere ahead, through the trees, Ravenna could see the first stone towers of what had to be Valdenmoor, rising against the sky like a dark crown. Whatever came next, she told herself, she had survived worse. She was not certain she believed it. Valdenmoor was nothing like Ashven. Ashven had been a working pack settlement, functional, utilitarian, built for efficiency over beauty, every stone placed to serve a purpose and no stone placed for any other reason. It had felt like a machine. It had felt like the inside of a fist. Valdenmoor felt like something that had grown rather than been built. The main keep was ancient, its stones worn smooth by centuries of wind, its towers rising in shapes that didn't quite follow architectural logic, as though whoever had raised them had been following some internal design that only made sense from very far away or very far inside. The courtyard they rode into was enormous, and the wolves who moved through it, guards, servants, pack members going about morning tasks, all stopped when the Alpha entered, and the stillness that fell over them was not the stillness of fear, it was the stillness of relief. Like watching a forest hold its breath and then exhale when the storm has passed. They were glad he was home. Ravenna filed this away carefully and said nothing. A woman met them at the main steps, tall, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and the kind of eyes that saw everything and filed it for later. She wore the dark gray of a ranked wolf, and she looked at Ravenna with an expression of calm assessment that was not unfriendly and was not warm. "Senna," Lucan said, dismounting with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "She'll need quarters, not the servant wing." Senna's eyebrows moved a fraction of an inch. "Guest quarters?" "The East Suite." The eyebrows went another fraction further. "Yes, I know what I said." "As you say, Alpha." Senna turned to Ravenna and her assessment sharpened. "I'm Senna, second in command of Valdenmoor. Come with me. You'll want food and rest before anyone asks anything else of you." It was the most considerate thing anyone had said to Ravenna in recent memory, and the fact that it came from a stranger in a foreign pack in circumstances that were, objectively, deeply alarming, said something either very good or very strange about this place. She followed Senna inside. The East Suite was 3 rooms. A bedroom with a bed that was actual size, not the narrow cot she had slept on for 18 years. A washroom with hot water, which she stood in for much longer than was strictly necessary. And a sitting room with a window that looked out over the eastern valley, gray-green in the morning light, an endless sweep of pine forest and stone ridge, and far below, the silver thread of a river she didn't know the name of. She sat on the window bench with wet hair and clean clothes and tried to think clearly. She was in the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. She had been purchased. That word still sat in her chest like a splinter. By its Alpha, who knew she was hiding something, who had housed her in guest quarters rather than the servant wing, and who had looked at her in the courtyard with an expression she couldn't name. The coiled thing inside her was restless. It had been restless since the moment his eyes had found her face. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and felt it move under her hands like a tide. She had no idea what it was. She had no one to ask. The Ashfin pack had no lore keepers she had access to, no elders who would have spoken to a servant girl about the old powers, and she had grown up knowing only what she had pieced together from overheard conversations and the pack library she had taught herself to read from in the hours after midnight when no one was watching. She knew, from those stolen hours, that power like hers had a name in the old texts. She had read it once and had not let herself read it again because reading it twice would have made it real. Luna touched. The gift of the moon herself, passed down through bloodlines so old the packs had forgotten them, carried by wolves who were not omegas and not alphas, but something between and beyond both. Anchors for their packs, channels for the moon's will, capable of bonds that went deeper than the mate bond, capable of healing what could not otherwise be healed. Capable, the text had also said, of destroying what could not otherwise be destroyed. She was not ready for any of that. A knock at the door. She smoothed her expression and turned from the window. "Come in." It was not Senna. It was Lucan himself, which surprised her enough that she stood before she had decided to stand. He stepped into the room and left the door open behind him, deliberately, she thought, so that she would know she was not trapped, and stopped near the entrance with his hands loose at his sides. He had changed from his traveling clothes. He looked, in the morning light of the East Suite, less like the figure she had seen at the back of the auction hall, mythic, storm still, everything that rumors are made of, and more simply, like a man who was tired and was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it for a long time. "I owe you an explanation." She waited. "I wasn't at Ironvale for the auction. I was there because Valdenmoor has a treaty interest in what the northern packs are doing with their Omega populations. There's been trafficking that goes beyond the legal sale framework, and I've been tracking it." He paused. "When they brought you to the floor, I scented something I have not scented in 11 years. Her breath caught. "My mate." The room was very quiet. Ravenna stood very still, and her heart was doing something she had no word for, and the silver-white coiled thing in her chest rose like a wave and pressed against her ribs, and she held it, held it, held it. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "I'm an Omega servant from—" "You are not an Omega servant. We have established that." He watched her. "I don't know who you are. I don't know where your bloodline comes from or why Ashfin Pack had you in their servant quarters. What I know is that you are my fated mate, that you are carrying power I have not seen in a living wolf since my grandmother's time, and that I brought you here because you were standing on that auction floor in chains, and the only thing I was capable of doing was getting you off it." Ravenna sat back down on the window bench. Her legs had made that decision independently. "Your mate died," she said, 3 years ago." Something moved across his face. Old grief, worn smooth by time but not gone, never gone. "My bonded partner died. She was not my fated mate. I made that choice for political reasons, and I lived with it, and I cared for her, and when she died, He stopped, collected himself. "The mate bond I am speaking of is different. It is older. I had given up on it." "And you think I am?" "I know you are." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at her with those pale, storm-gray eyes, and he did not look away, and he did not push. And she had been looked at her whole life by wolves who saw a servant girl and saw through her and saw nothing. And this was not that. This was someone looking at her and seeing everything he could see, and waiting for her permission to see the rest. "I'm frightened," she said. It came out before she could stop it. "Not of you, particularly. Of what I am. Of what any of this means. I've been hiding for 6 months, and I'm very good at hiding, but I don't know what happens when I stop." "Nothing bad will happen to you in this pack." "You can't promise that." "I am the alpha of this pack." He held her gaze. "Watch me promise it." She did not let the light out that day, or the next. She ate meals that were brought to her rooms, real food, seasoned, plentiful, served without contempt. And she slept in the actual size bed, and she looked out the east window at the valley, and she thought. Senna came by the second morning with a stack of books. "I thought you might want something to do," Senna said, setting them on the table with the manner of a woman who had pre-read them and selected the ones she considered useful. "The lore library is open to pack members and guests. Alpha Drav has given you guest status, which means you have access to all common areas without escort." Ravenna looked at the books. They were old. Several of them had the look of texts she had tried to find in Ashvin's library, the kind that didn't have titles on the spine, only symbols. "Are these about what I think they're about?" "That depends on what you think they're about." Senna's expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes were not. She was curious, genuinely curious, not the acquisitive curiosity of someone who wanted to use what she found, but the curiosity of someone who wanted to understand. "I saw what you suppressed in the courtyard. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I'm not most people." She paused. "Whatever you are, you're managing it carefully. That shows intelligence. These books might help you manage it more effectively." She left without further comment. Ravenna picked up the first book and began to read. She found the word on the 3rd page. Luna touched. She read through the night. By morning, she understood 3 things she had not understood before. First, that what she carried was not an anomaly or an aberration, but an inheritance, something that had passed through bloodlines for generations, surfacing rarely, often in wolves who had been separated from their lineage and therefore had no context for what they were. Second, that the power was not something she could hide indefinitely. It had its own rhythm, tied to the moon's cycle, and within the next 2 weeks, it would come to a natural crest, whether she allowed it or not. Third, and this was the part that made her sit very still in the gray morning light with the book open on her lap, Luna-touched wolves were not solitary. They were made for packs. Specifically, they were made for the alpha they were fated to, and the bond between them was not like the ordinary mate bond. It was older. It was a ceiling. When a Luna-touched wolf bonded with her fated alpha, the power in her became the power of the pack itself, protective, sustaining, capable of things that no individual wolf's strength could match. She thought about Lucan standing in the courtyard with the relief exhale of his pack around him. She thought about his pale, storm-gray eyes looking at her and waiting. She thought about the chain of events that had led her here. Ashvin's debt, Alpha Carvin's contemptuous donation of her like a piece of furniture, the auction floor, the cold chains, and she thought, if this was the moon's will, the moon had a brutal sense of irony. She also thought, the moon had not been wrong yet, by all accounts. Now seems like a good time to pause and let you catch your breath, because I know you're feeling everything Ravenna is feeling right now. The fear, the hope, the dawning sense that maybe this impossible situation is exactly where she was always supposed to be. If you're still here after all of that, it tells me this story has you. And if it has you, do me this one favor. Hit subscribe on Laura's Alpha Collections. Every subscribe helps this channel keep going, keeps these stories coming, and means more to me than I can say. And drop a comment. I want to hear from you. Here are 2 questions to get you thinking. Could you have kept a secret as powerful as Ravenna's hidden for 6 months, knowing one slip could cost you everything? And this one. Does Lucan deserve Ravenna's trust? Or has he already done too much, too fast, without asking for her consent? I read every single comment, and your thoughts matter to me. Welcome to Laura's Alpha Collections. I'm so glad you're here. On the 5th day, something changed. Ravenna was in the lore library. She had been given a permanent spot at the long reading table near the eastern windows, and she had begun to feel, cautiously, like the table was hers. When she heard voices in the corridor outside that were not the ordinary voices of pack life. Sharp voices, urgent voices. A woman's voice, clipped and cold, cutting through the low murmur of the keep like a blade through water. She heard Senna's voice responding, professionally even, professionally firm. Then the door opened. The woman who entered was beautiful in the way that expensive weapons are beautiful, deliberately, pointedly, in a way that was designed to make you think about nothing else. She was fair-haired, sharp-featured, dressed in travel clothes that had been chosen to be impressive, and she moved through the library door like someone who had never once in her life needed to ask permission to enter a room. Her eyes found Ravenna immediately. She had been looking for her, Ravenna understood, before she even opened the door. And the look in those eyes was not the curiosity of a stranger. It was calculation. And underneath the calculation, something sharper. Hatred that had been waiting for a target. "So," the woman said, "you're the Omega from Ironvale." A pause. "You're not what I expected." Ravenna set her book down with deliberate calm. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Gervessa," the woman said, and her smile was a thin and lovely thing. "Lady of the Westvane Pack, and Lucan Dravs intended." The library was very quiet. Ravenna had learned, over 18 years of servitude, to make her face do exactly what she needed it to do, regardless of what was happening behind it. She made it do nothing now. Neutral, pleasant, attentive. She filed the information. She thought about what Lucan had told her, about a mate bond he'd had for political reasons, about choices made under different pressures. "I see," she said. "I wasn't aware Alpha Drav hadn't intended." "He wasn't aware he needed to inform the servants." Gervessa's smile didn't waver. She moved further into the library, slow and deliberate, circling the table the way a wolf circles something it is considering whether to eat. "Let me be direct with you, because I think you will appreciate directness. Lucan bought you at auction, for reasons that have not been explained to his inner circle, and there are people in this pack who find that concerning. Not everyone here is as charitable toward strays as our Alpha." "I'm sure that's true," Ravenna said. "I'm going to give you an opportunity," Gervessa said, stopping across the table. "Tell me what you are. Tell me why he bought you, and I may be able to make your time in Valdenmoor considerably more comfortable than it would otherwise be." A pause. "Or don't. And I will make it my priority to find out on my own. These things have a way of coming out." The threat was wrapped so carefully in silk that it would have been almost invisible to someone who hadn't spent a lifetime recognizing threats wrapped in silk. Ravenna looked at Dravessa across the lore library table and thought, she knows, or she suspects, and she is afraid. Not of me specifically, not yet, but of what I represent, which is a disruption to an arrangement she has spent considerable effort constructing. She thought about the silver-white light coiled in her chest. She thought about the lore books she had been reading for 5 days. She thought about chains. "Thank you for the offer," Ravenna said. "I'll manage on my own." Dravessa looked at her for a long moment. The silk fell away from her expression, just briefly, just long enough for Ravenna to see what was underneath. And then it came back up, smooth and lovely and cold as ever. "Don't say I didn't give you the choice." She left. The door closed behind her. Senna appeared in the doorway, expression carefully managed. "How much did you hear?" Ravenna asked. "All of it," Senna said. "I should tell you, the intended arrangement she mentioned is not recognized by Pack law. It was a proposal from Westvane 3 years ago, after the Alpha's partner died. He did not accept it. She has been pushing for formal recognition ever since." "He didn't tell me." "He didn't know she was coming. She arrived an hour ago, uninvited." Senna paused, and for the first time, her professional neutrality softened into something that was almost not warm. Senna did not do warm, but honest. "Ravenna, he has told no one why you're here. He is protecting something. I think you know what." Ravenna looked at her hands on the table. The moon, through the library's east window, was 3/4 full. In 9 days, give or take, it would be at its peak. In 9 days, the light would come out whether she willed it or not. "I need to talk to him," she said. She found him in the training yard, not sparring, just sitting on the low stone wall that ran along the yard's north edge, alone in the way that alphas were alone, even when their pack moved around them, which was not loneliness, but its own specific kind of solitude. He looked up when she came through the gate. "I heard she came to see you." "She did." Ravenna sat on the wall a careful distance from him, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of herself, of the coiled thing which had been pulling toward him since the moment she arrived, which was pulling toward him now with the gentle, inexorable logic of water seeking its level. "You didn't tell me about her." "There was nothing to tell. The arrangement she's claiming doesn't exist. I refuse the proposal." "She doesn't know that." "She knows. She's chosen to proceed as though she doesn't, because Westvane has political reasons for wanting the alliance, and she has personal reasons for wanting the title." A pause. "I should have told you she was a complication. I didn't think she would move this quickly." "It's not just the complication." Ravenna turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, and the meeting of their eyes had that same quality it had had since the courtyard. The pull, the tide, the recognition that had nothing to do with choice. "The moon crest is 9 days away. When it comes, whatever I am, it will be visible. Literally. There will be no hiding it." His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "What do you need?" "I don't know yet. The books say that for a Luna-touched wolf, the first crest is unpredictable. It can be a claiming, or it can be a destruction, or it can be something in between, depending on..." She stopped. "Depending on what?" "Depending on whether the bond is answered." The silence between them was different from previous silences. It had weight. It had the quality of a door that is about to either open or close permanently. "I'm not going to pressure you," he said. I have been where you are, faced with a bond I didn't ask for, carrying consequences I hadn't chosen. I know what it is to feel like something is being decided for you by forces you didn't consent to. He held her gaze. Whatever you decide about the bond, I'll support it. That is my word as Alpha. She looked at him, at the tiredness in his face and the patience in his eyes and the way he sat, coiled like something that had been held still for a very long time by its own discipline, not by anything external, nothing holding him but himself. She thought about Ashfen Pack, where she had been nothing and had always been nothing, where the only power she had ever been allowed was the power to be invisible. She thought about the silver-white light. She thought about what it would mean to stop hiding. "Tell me about your grandmother," she said. "The one with the power like mine." Something unlocked in his face, just slightly, just enough. Her name was Voren. She was the most terrifying and the most gentle wolf I have ever known. A pause. She used to say that the moon doesn't make mistakes. She just sometimes has terrible timing. Ravenna looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like years, and it came out of her before she could decide whether to allow it, and it felt like the first breath after a long dive, and the silver-white thing in her chest rose with it, just a little, just enough to glow faintly at the surface of her skin, before she gathered it back. He watched it happen with an expression she could finally name: wonder. The 7 days that followed were not easy, but they were something she had never had before. Hers. She read. She walked the keep's long corridors and the outer walls with their view of the valley. She ate meals in the great hall with the pack, and she watched the way Valdenmoor worked, the small economies of trust, the way wolves moved around each other, the absence of the casual cruelty she had grown up inside. Senna introduced her to the pack's inner circle without ceremony, as though she were simply someone worth knowing. The pack watched her with curiosity but not hostility, and she began, tentatively, to understand that this was a pack that had learned to take its cues from the Alpha, and the Alpha had made his regard for her quietly and unmistakably clear. Dravessa stayed. That was the complication. She moved through Valdenmoor with the ease of someone claiming territory, her presence in the keep's common spaces a constant, pointed reminder of her ambitions, her eyes on Ravenna with the cool calculation of a woman making plans. On the 6th day, she made her move. It came at the evening meal, the whole pack gathered, the great hall lit and warm, Ravenna seated near the center of the long table where Senna had placed her, which was near enough to the Alpha's end to be significant and far enough not to be presumptuous. Dravessa was seated at the other end, near the Westvane contingent who had arrived with her, and she had been watching Ravenna all evening with the specific attention of someone waiting for their moment. The moment came when a pack elder, old Varith, who had been pointedly deferential to Dravessa all evening, rose and cleared his throat. "I'd like to raise, for the pack's consideration, the matter of Valdenmoor's formal alliance with Westvane. The Lady Dravessa has been most patient in awaiting Alpha Drav's decision, and given the instability of the Northern Territories, many of us feel that—" "Varith." Lucan's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The elder stopped. "This is not the forum for political alliances." A pause. "But since you've raised it, I will address it directly. I have no intention of formalizing any arrangement with Westvane. That position has not changed and will not change." Dravessa's expression did not flicker. She had been expecting this, Ravenna realized. This was not her move, it was a feint, clearing the board for the real strike. "Then perhaps," Dravessa said, her voice carrying beautifully down the table, "the pack deserves to understand what has changed your priorities so dramatically. She turned to look at Ravenna with eyes like winter glass. An Omega purchased at auction, given guest quarters, access to the private library. It's an unusual arrangement. A pause. Wolves talk, Alpha. They are beginning to ask questions. The hall had gone very quiet. Ravenna felt every eye in the room. She felt the coiled light rising, not with her permission, but with the urgency of something that had been held too long, that recognized its moment, that was not going to wait for her to decide. She had 9 days. She had been wrong about 9 days. The moon, it appeared, had decided to move its schedule. She felt it coming up through her like a tide through a sandbar, unstoppable, vast, silver white and ancient. And for one moment, she sat with her hands pressed flat on the table and tried to hold it. And then she looked down the table at Lucan, and he was already looking at her. And the look on his face was not alarm. It was the look of a man who has been waiting. "Let it," he said. She let go. The light came out of her like a held breath released, not violent, not explosive, but luminous and absolute, silver white and resonant, filling the great hall from floor to ceiling in a wash of radiance that was warm rather than cold, that smelled of pine and moonlight and something older than both. Every wolf in the hall went still. Not frozen, still. The way wolves go still when they feel their alpha's will, that instinctive deference of the body to something true. Dravessa had risen halfway from her chair. She sank back into it. Ravenna stood. She hadn't meant to stand, but she was standing, and the light was moving through her and out of her, and she could feel, for the first time, without fear, what it was. It was not alien. It was not dangerous. It was her. It was something she had been carrying her whole life in a pack that had never seen her, and now it was being seen, and the seeing was the release. Across the hall, Lucan rose. He walked the length of the table without taking his eyes off her, and the pack parted for him the way they always did, but differently now, not just for their alpha, but for something larger than the two of them separately, something the oldest instincts in them recognized. He stopped in front of her. The light was all around them. "I told you," he said. "The moon doesn't make mistakes." "She has terrible timing," Ravenna said. "Ravenna." He lifted his hand, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. And when she didn't, he pressed his palm to her cheek, and the contact sent the light blazing to its full height, and she felt the mate bond snap into place between them, like the closing of a circle that had been open for years. "You are mine. You have always been mine, and I will spend however long it takes making sure you believe it." The hall was silent. Then it was not. The pack erupted, not in fear, not in confusion, but in the particular joyful chaos of wolves who have felt their pack bond strengthen, who can feel in their bones the click of something settling into rightness, who recognize, even if they cannot name it, that the hole in their alpha has finally been filled. Senna, Ravenna noticed, was smiling. It was a small smile, carefully managed, but it was there. Dravessa was not smiling. Dravessa was sitting very still at her end of the table with her hands folded and her face composed, and she was the only wolf in the hall who was looking at Ravenna with something other than joy or wonder. Ravenna looked back at her, calm and luminous, the light settling now into something steadier, a warmth rather than a blaze, the natural rhythm of what she was finding its level at last. She had been invisible her whole life. She understood invisibility. She understood what it was to look at someone who had power and know that you did not, and to plan around that absence, to build everything on the foundation of what you could take rather than what you could earn. She understood Gervessa better, perhaps, than Gervessa wanted to be understood. She also understood that understanding was not the same as forgiveness, and that forgiveness was not the same as immunity. The formal reckoning came 2 days later in the Pack Council chamber. Not a tribunal, not a punishment, but the accounting that Pack law required when a challenge to the Alpha's authority had been mounted and failed. Gervessa stood in the center of the chamber with her Westvane attendants behind her and her composure intact, and she made her case in the careful, measured tone of a woman who had been practicing it for days. She had acted within her rights as a visiting dignitary. She had raised legitimate questions about Pack governance. She had made no formal challenge and intended none. All of this was technically true. "You attempted to use my Pack's meal table as a political stage," Lucan said. He was seated at the head of the council table, and Ravenna sat at his right, not behind him, not beside him as a subordinate, but beside him as what she was, which the bond had made impossible to misread. "You came to this keep uninvited. You approached my mate in the library and attempted to intimidate her." He paused. "These are not the actions of a dignitary. They are the actions of someone who calculated that I would not respond because she believed she held leverage." "I held a proposal," Gervessa said. "One your Pack's own elders supported." "My Pack's elders do not make my decisions. And the proposal was refused 3 years ago and has been refused every time since." He looked at her for a long moment. "I am going to tell you now, clearly, in front of witnesses, so that it cannot be misremembered. There is no arrangement between Valdenmoor and Westvane. There will not be one. You will leave this keep today and return to your own territory. Westvane will be offered a standard border treaty, as we offer to all neighboring packs, and it will contain no provisions for alliance or marriage or any other arrangement beyond the ordinary civilities of neighbors." Gervessa held his gaze for a long moment. She was calculating. Ravenna could see it. The rapid, precise recalibration of someone who had been outplayed and was determining the cost of accepting that gracefully versus the cost of escalating. She was smart enough to recognize that one of those costs was considerably higher than the other. "As you say, Alpha," Gervessa said. Her eyes moved to Ravenna. One last look, the kind that contains everything that cannot be said. Then she looked away. "I wish you and your mate happiness." She left with her attendants. The chamber doors closed behind her. Senna exhaled. "That could have been worse." "I'm aware." Lucan looked at Ravenna. "Are you all right?" "I'm all right," she considered. "I think I've never been all right before, so I'm still recognizing what it feels like." The council chamber was quiet around them. The Pack elders, those who had been present, had the expressions of men and women who were revising certain assumptions about the distribution of power in the room they were sitting in. Vareth, in particular, was studying the table in front of him with the focused attention of someone who would very much like to not be noticed. "Vareth," the elder looked up, "we'll discuss your choices over the past week at a time of my choosing." A pause. "For now, dismissed." Vareth left with considerable speed. Senna watched him go and said nothing, which was its own commentary. The Mooncrest night came 3 days later, and it was not the catastrophe Ravenna had been bracing for. It was something else entirely. The Pack gathered in the outer courtyard under the full moon, not because they were summoned, but because the light coming from the east tower, where Ravenna stood on the parapet with Lucan beside her, drew them the way firelight draws moths, the way the first warmth of spring draws everything that has been too long cold. The silver-white radiance poured down over Valdenmoor like a benediction, and every wolf in the courtyard lifted their face to it, and Ravenna felt them through the bond, all of them, every member of the pack, their lives and their fears and their hopes and their love for each other, all of it flowing through her like a river through an open field, immense and moving and alive. She had not known it would feel like this. She had been afraid of the power because she had been alone with it, and power is terrifying when you are alone. Power in the context of belonging. Power in the context of a pack that was hers, of an alpha whose hand was warm around hers, of a place that was home, was something else entirely. She let it go, all of it. The full tide of what she was, uncoiled at last, spread out across Valdenmoor like moonlight across open water. She felt the pack heal, not dramatically, not wounds closing or bones knitting, subtler than that. Old griefs softened, old conflicts lost their edges. The invisible accumulation of days and seasons of difficulty, which every pack carries, which no wolf ever mentions but every wolf feels. It moved through her and she held it, and she gave it back different, lighter, the way a river takes sediment and returns clear water. Lucan's hand tightened on hers. "Your grandmother's stories," she said. "The things she told you she could do. She said it felt like being the place where the moon touches the earth." A pause. She said it was the loneliest thing in the world when she was without her mate. Ravenna looked out over her pack. She was already thinking of them that way, hers, not possessively but protectively, the way you think of the people you have chosen and who have chosen you, and felt the silver light move through her, steady and deep and complete. "It's not lonely now," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." Alpha Carven of Ashfen Pack received official word 3 weeks later, via formal pack correspondence delivered by Valdenmoor's fastest rider, that the Omega he had donated to the Ironvale auction had been identified as Luna-touched, had accepted a mate bond with the Alpha of Valdenmoor, and had assumed the title and role of Luna of Valdenmoor, effective immediately. The letter also contained, in formal pack legal language, a request for the complete records of Ravenna's background, lineage, and time in Ashfen's care, along with a notation that Valdenmoor's legal counsel would be reviewing those records with particular attention to the question of whether the donation of a Luna-touched wolf to a commercial auction constituted a violation of the Northern Pacts governing wolves of old blood. It was not a threat. It was considerably more dangerous than a threat. It was a promise, written in ink, that someone was now paying attention, and that someone had both the power and the will to act on what they found. Alpha Carven, by all accounts, spent the better part of an afternoon reading it. Then he had a drink. Then he had several more drinks. Then he sent his own legal counsel to find out exactly how much trouble he was in. He was, his legal counsel informed him, in quite a lot of trouble. Ravenna, when she was told of this, was in the lore library at her reading table, definitively hers now, her book spread across it in the organized chaos of someone who had claimed a space and settled into it. She set down her pen and looked at the window and the pine valley beyond it and the pale afternoon light, and thought about 18 years of gray dresses and narrow cots and contempt worn so smooth by repetition it had almost felt like weather. She thought about the night in the Ashfen forest when the light had first come through. She thought about the auction floor and the chains and the gavel coming down. "Good," she said. Senna, seated across the table with her own work, looked up. Good? Good, Ravenna said again, with the complete and calm certainty of a woman who knows exactly where she stands and is done pretending otherwise. Let them look at everything. Let them find everything. She picked up her pen. I have nothing left to hide. Senna considered this for a moment. Then she returned to her work with what was, by Senna's standards, an extremely expressive silence. Outside, over the valley, the afternoon sun was moving toward the western ridge, and in a few hours the moon would rise, and Ravenna would feel it rise the way she felt everything now, fully, without armor, without the long-held breath of someone waiting for the danger. She was Luna of Valdenmoor. She was loved by an alpha who had crossed a continent to stand at the back of an auction hall and make one quiet, absolute claim on a woman he had recognized as his own before she recognized herself. She had a pack that was hers, and a home that was hers, and a power that was no longer something to be hidden, but something to be used for healing, for protection, for the pack that moved through the keep below her window like a river finding its course. She had been sold, once, by people who had seen her as nothing. She had become something that could not be sold, could not be priced, could not be owned, because what she was did not belong to anyone. It moved through her like the moon moved through the sky, freely and completely and wholly itself. She wrote in her journal with steady hands in the afternoon light, and she did not look over her shoulder, and the silver-white warmth in her chest burned low and constant and bright, like a hearth fire that has finally, after a very long time in the cold, been lit and tended and allowed to stay. Did you like the story? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share what country, state, or city you're watching from. You might hear your name in our next shout-out. Special shout-out to our incredible viewers from Nashville, Tennessee, Rhode Island, Melbourne, Victoria, Alberta, Canada, Stillwater, Oklahoma, Surrey, England, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Columbus, Georgia, Lillestrøm, Norway, Gaithersburg, Maryland, Prineville, Oregon, Las Vegas, Nevada, and more, and so many more around the world. Subscribe now and stay with us for the next story. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.